Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen, an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple of different reasons. The first of which is just to take my brain out of the mode of background work over the course of the week and move into the process of actually writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason. The second is just to allow you, the viewer who have come across this video for whatever reason brought you here today, to gain some insight into the assigned text for the week. So that is why I do these. It's good to be back. If you are a regular viewer, you know that I've been gone, or I've been off the last couple of weeks, actually been doing what I can only call market research, which is a really dopey way of saying that I've been in the Holy Land for the last couple of weeks worth of the last couple of weeks, traveling the places where Jesus would have traveled, visiting many of the historical sites, and in a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which has been truly a blessing and one that I'm still trying to process in my mind as things go on. But back again and getting myself geared up for yet another weekend. And not only another weekend, but moving into a very important week here in the church calendar, or the church year. As we look at this coming Sunday, which is March 25th, 2018, the final Sunday in March. It is also the sixth Sunday in Lent, which also doubles as Palm Sunday. Now, if you've caught videos that I've made in the past with Palm Sunday, here in the Lutheran Church at least, and in I think also different denominations, there has been a movement in recent years of Palm Sunday to also be called Passion Sunday, and with the aim at really highlighting the various aspects of what went on during Holy Week, leading up to Easter, which of course will be next Sunday on April 1st. But I don't tend to do that. If you've caught my videos before, I stick with just Palm Sunday, with that text and with that focus. My congregation does a pretty good job of attending the midweek services, the Monday, Thursday, and the Good Friday, and so I allow those two services, those two times to kind of stand on their own, and I don't try and push them forward into Passion Sunday. That's just something that personally I'm not a fan of. So that's a really long description of saying it's Palm Sunday this Sunday, a familiar story, oftentimes called the Triumphal Entry, as Jesus comes into Jerusalem at the beginning of the week for what will be his final week of life before his crucifixion, and then subsequent resurrection on Easter. So that is the kind of the 411 of where we're at. And for me this year, again, having just been in the Holy Land, having just stood on top of the Mount of Olives, looking out across the valley into what's known as the Temple Mount, I've got some pretty awesome insight into things this year that are playing in the back of my mind as I go with this. But all that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. Again, March 25th, 2018, the final Sunday of Lent, Palm Sunday, Passion Sunday, if you want to go there. But the assigned text for this is Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. That's a lot of ones in there. Mark 1:1, verse 1 through 1:1. I think it's kind of funny. My high schoolers pointed that out to me this a couple of days ago, that I thought was kind of cool. So with that being said, before I dive in, just a quick little bit of scriptural background for where we are. Jesus has been moving towards Jerusalem, and in some of what we see ahead of this, he's been out in the wilderness around the Jordan River. We hear that he's passed through Jericho. Jericho is famous for when Joshua led the Israelites into the Promised Land way back in the Old Testament times. Jericho was the first place that they encountered, and there was a battle there, and they destroyed the city. Jericho is quite close to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, not very far away, and yet, so Jesus passes through there. We hear of his encounter with blind Bartimaeus, and the healing of that, and that once Jesus heals him, we hear that Bartimaeus follows him on the way. So he probably would have been present in the crowd here at the Triumphal Entry, and that he was a follower, and that'll perhaps come up as we're reading this. So, okay, with that, let's go ahead and read it. Mark chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethpage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into this village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find there tied a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say to them, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus, threw their cloaks upon it, and he sat upon it. Many of the people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. All right, that's the reading. So, some various thoughts of what's going on. They're coming towards the city. They're coming to the Mount of Olives, which, as I kind of mentioned a moment ago, is a large hillside. And he looks out over and he sees, and there's Jerusalem. But to get there, to get from the Mount of Olives over to the Temple Mount, you have to go way down deep into a very, very deep, steep valley called the Kidron Valley. We hear about the Kidron in various aspects of the Passion narrative, particularly in John, which we'll be looking at next week. But there's so they're coming towards it, and it seems that Jesus is making some conscious decisions. Making some preparations, if you want to call it that. He tells two of the disciples, "Hey, go over into the other village. You're going to find a colt there. Bring it here. If anyone gives you any static, just tell them the Lord needs it, and he'll return it." And then we hear that they go, and exactly what Jesus had said is going to happens. And so we see that there's some perhaps divine foresight there. Others have speculated, well, maybe Jesus was doing some work behind the scenes, setting a lot of the stuff up. That's certainly possible. That's not listed for us in the details of the text. But so they bring it, and Jesus comes upon it, and then it's the triumphal entry. He goes down the road, down into the valley, which now, having just done that a matter of a handful of days ago, I know it's a very kind of, you're coming down at an angle, clear down deep into the valley, and then looking back up at the city and the gate, the walls, and where the temple would be in front of you, and then he comes back up into it. So we would have walked that road, or we would have ridden that road, as we hear. And the thoughts that are in my head in this is not so much centering on, was Jesus, was he working behind the scenes to prepare all this, what was going on? But more so, the thoughts that are in my head are, what were the thoughts that were in the head of the people who were there that day? We hear, of course, it's called the Triumphal Entry. We perhaps think of that as, or have the tendency to think of that as like the return of the conquering hero who's coming into the city. And maybe there was some aspect of that, but Jesus does so, this triumphal thing, he does in kind of a humble way. He's riding on the colt of a donkey. Now, donkeys were commonly used. They were a common mode of transportation at the time. However, it seems that everyone else is walking. So that's one step that Jesus apparently is taking. It's different. But if he was the triumphal, like, returning king or the incoming king, the colt of a donkey is kind of a humble thing to be riding on. You think you'd be riding a horse. There were horses there at the time. So, would that be going on? Would that be something that's different? A little indication of things. Now, Jerusalem, while an important city, I mean, it's the vital central city to the Jewish culture, was not the capital. It had been, 1,000 years earlier in the time of David. We hear about the kingdom of David, but by this point, the capital of Palestine, which of course was a Roman province, had been established in Caesarea, or they call it Caesarea Maritime. It's a city that's farther north up on the coast, where ships would have come in from the Mediterranean. Herod the Great, a generation before Jesus, had established the capital there. So the conquering hero, the triumphal return, is not coming into what would be considered the political capital. In fact, the political powers that be didn't often even spend that much time in Jerusalem. pardon me, I have to wipe my nose there. They would have been there for the festival, or the festival of Passover, which is coming up, and that's of course why we hear that Pontius Pilate is there, and we have that interaction later. But if he was going to go into the capital, this isn't the capital. So there's that aspect to be considered, to think about. So what was going on in Jesus' mind? That's a question that I don't have a good answer for, but having again just stood there and looked, and knowing that now anyway, it's a graveyard that you're walking down through. That's an interesting point. And some research that I've done has indicated that that there were already dead bodies that were buried in the Kidron Valley. It's very likely not the tomb to tomb gravestones graveyard that it is now, but it was, there was the presence of death there, that Jesus would have perhaps looked off to the south, which is where the Valley of Gehenna is, on the south side of the city, which is where the burning trash heap was, and he would have seen the smoke rising from there. He would have looked across at the old city as it was at that time. And I wonder what was in Jesus' mind. It seems that he's making conscious decisions to go there, that he's doing so willingly. This is the will of God. This is the mission that he is on, which he has predicted several times prior to this. He knows what's coming, and he chooses to do it. He walks down into that valley, what I consider now to be a valley filled with death, knowing that there's death on the other side of it. And it won't come for a few days yet, but there's death on the other side of it. So I wonder what was in Jesus' mind. How easy would it have been for him to just say no and turned around and rode away or walked away? He could have made that choice, but he didn't. He willingly did it. So that's one thought in my head. And the other thought that's in my head is what was going through the minds of the people that were there. And I've already said this. We think of this, we call it the Triumphal Entry. We tend to think of it as this huge celebration, and some of the different gospel accounts make it more so that celebratory stance. Luke in particular really does that. But here in Mark, it's a little more subdued. But we do hear that those who were following, which would have included Bartimaeus, like I mentioned earlier, and those who went ahead, so this crowd that is around Jesus, however big it is, they're shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven. So that's what we hear. And I wonder what was in the minds of the people. What was the mood? Was it celebratory? Was it more lament? Excuse me. Hosanna is an interesting word. Now we tend to think of it, again, celebratory. Hosanna. Hosanna literally means save us now. That's what the word means. And so I find myself wondering, what was their mood? What was their intention? And maybe it was mixed. Maybe they were celebrating what seems to be the coming king, the one who is going to reestablish the throne of David. Very messianic in nature. But what's their expectation of the messianic situation? Excuse me, got a little cough in my throat there. Are they thinking political? And if so, it's all tying into what I was talking about before. Would the political figure be coming back? Well, yes, because Bethlehem was, or not Bethlehem, Jerusalem was the capital established by David, so that would make sense. Are they thinking more along the lines of, oh, pardon me, gosh, talking is getting a major hitch in my throat. Oh, fun. Are they thinking more along the lines of save us from the oppression of the Romans, save us from the oppression that we have felt, kingdom after kingdom, empire after empire after empire? Keep in mind the history of the Jewish people. They were born, quote unquote. Their culture came about in captivity in Egypt. Is this Hosanna, save us now? Is that the sense that they have? Just like the 400 years of crying out in bondage? Is that what they're saying? Is this more a lament to God rather than praising Jesus? We don't know. And that's okay. That ambiguity is an okay situation. And that's really the kind of the direction that I'm going with as we go into Holy Week, as we go into Palm Sunday, as we approach Easter. What it collectively is our mood, if we want to use it that? What individually is our mood? Where are we coming from? What are we feeling? What are we thinking What events are going on in our lives that shape our sense in this time? Are we celebrating the King? Um, and if so, are we doing so out of hindsight because we know what's coming through the week and we also know what's coming up on Easter? Are we celebrating the Lord? Are we crying out for mercy? Are we crying out to be saved and crying out to the one who is able to do something? Or what sense do we carry? That's really the question that I want to pose to my congregation, that I want them to think about. And I can't answer that question for them. I mean, I know some of what's going on in people's lives, but I can't say specifically this is what's in your head right now. This is the sense that you have, or that you should have, or that you're supposed to have. I can't dictate that for people, and that's okay. So that's kind of the direction that I'm going with this. Jesus is coming into the city. It's coming to fruition. We're getting closer and closer and closer, and it's basically starting off. It's kicking off this week of what we will celebrate, what we will remember in the days to come, and what is everyone thinking? That's the big question. And yet, despite what we may be thinking or feeling, despite what Jesus may have been thinking or feeling in that time, we know what happens. We know that ultimately he went through it. He took it. Jesus came to show us that the kingdom of heaven is one of love and acceptance, and the world said no, and God said, well, I'm not done yet. So if you have thoughts, questions, comments, throw them down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week. May God be with you as we move here into Holy Week. May the depth of what God has done truly impact you this year, and we will catch you next time.